Hello everybody, Pascal here from Neutrality Studies, and I just had with me Pitasanna Shanmungathas, who was on this channel before. Pita is a Canadian journalist and filmmaker who recently made a new documentary called Neelan Unsilenced. The documentary is available for free and it recounts the story of Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam, a Sri Lankan politician and constitutional lawyer who was trying through different kinds of activism and his political vision for a new constitution to end the long and bloody civil war and bring peace to Sri Lanka. Pita allowed me to show you the trailer, which I will do now, and after that we will go straight into the discussion. So here's the trailer and then the debate with Pitasanna Shanmungathas.
The scenes you just saw were from the final stages of Sri Lanka's civil war in 2009, when government forces shelled Tamil civilian areas. Could the death of thousands of Tamil civilians have been avoided? What happened to Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam, the Tamil constitutional scholar who helped Sri Lankan President Chandrika Kumaratunga craft a set of bold and progressive constitutional reform proposals that might have peacefully resolved the ethnic conflict more than 10 years prior? This documentary tells his story.
President Chandrika's landmark proposals for constitutional reform may have made the demand for a Tamil homeland or Elam irrelevant.
All the said proposals were forthright and candid in comparison to the previous proposals.
Neelan Tiruchelvam worked very closely with the GLPs.
It was a tremendous opportunity, and I think that's why Neelan jumped into the effort and he took a leadership role in trying to make the Chandrika Kumaratunga initiative succeed.
The LTTE never wanted a democratic solution. They didn't want devolution. People like Neelan who had other ideas and who actually saw solutions.
When you don't attach any sanctity to your own life, you cross an important emotional threshold. This means that you become almost the most perfect, the most complete fighting machine. It is a form of extreme nationalism which is capable of commanding the kind of passion, the kind of...
LTTE's political methodology and their main strategy, eliminating and killing the traitors, naming everybody as traitors and killing them, is a kind of a social cancer.
We don't offer a united solution. We don't agree on a common program and offer it to the people. We are at each other's throat.
LTTE's killing of Neelan was a political act, and our remembering of him was also a political act.
I strongly believe that was the biggest mistake the LTTE did. I think the moment they killed Neelan, any kind of international support they had was done for.
As we look back, when the armed struggle had failed, there has been so much loss and destruction, primarily of the Tamil people. When you compare with who has lost out more, and we look towards a solution. The path that Neelan showed us is the only one that is available to us.
You have to think of Neelan not simply for his role with respect to, quote, ethnic conflict, unquote, with particular emphasis, of course, on his own country, but you have to think of him as a figure who was important to the whole course of development of the human rights movement.
This is an island society, and therefore both communities have been historically and for the future be locked into that island. And so the challenge is how can they evolve political structures.
Pita, you are also Sri Lankan by heritage, and you are very inspired by that person, so you made a movie about him, and you're here to tell us all about it. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Pascal. It's a pleasure to be on your program again.
Well, great having you again, because you keep making documentary movies and you keep putting them out for free. You don't even they're accessible on the internet because you're a man with a mission, and the mission is to tell people how good politics would actually work. And I think you found inspiration in this person, Neelan Tiruchelvam.
Yeah, Neelan Tiruchelvam. So he was a very inspirational figure. So Neelan was born and raised in he was born in British Ceylon, now present day Sri Lanka, and he was born in a very affluent family. His father was a politician and a minister of local government in Sri Lanka, and immediately after Sri Lanka's independence from the British, they were faced with an ethnic crisis because the majority community of the island, the Sinhala community, which constituted 78% of the population, immediately began imposing discriminatory policies targeting the minority communities, namely the Tamil community, which constituted less than 20% of the population. And so they imposed language policies such as the Sinhala Only Act, making Sinhala the only official language, and discriminating and disenfranchising Tamil speakers from government positions, from positions within upper class society. And there were pogroms, ethnic pogroms for decades and decades. So Neelan's father was actively trying to bring about a federal solution. He was seeking to bring about policies that would protect the rights of the minority communities under a federal solution. And Neelan's father was unsuccessful in that goal due to rivalry among the majority Sinhalese political parties. And so his son was exposed to that environment growing up, and his son was determined to change things, and he eventually did.
And were they themselves Tamil or Sinhalese?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So Neelan was part of the minority Tamil community. So he was born in the as an ethnic Tamil, and but they grew up in a very affluent environment. When the British were in power, the British had privileged the minority Tamil community, and this had fostered a great deal of resentment among the majority Sinhalese community because the minority Tamils were being disproportionately represented within the military. For instance, close to 40% of Tamils were in the Ceylon the military, even though they constituted less than 20% of the population. They were in engineering backgrounds and in education backgrounds, in overwhelming percentages, far more than their actual percentage within the island. So this had fostered a great deal of resentment among the majority Sinhalese community. And once they got independence, the majority community sought to, in retaliation, impose legislation in terms of education, in terms of language, that would consolidate their majority and that would subjugate the Tamils. And this eventually led to a civil war in 1983. And Neelan, as a minority Tamil, he sought to bring about a peaceful solution, a federal solution, just like his father wanted. And he put forward, he co-authored a set of constitutional reform proposals known as the Union of Regions proposals on August 3rd, 1995, 30 years to this day, August 3rd of this filming. And they are to date the boldest and most progressive proposals that seek to redress the grievances of the minority communities. That's a quote. That's a quote that Neelan, a statement that Neelan made. And to date, they're the boldest attempt to redress the grievances of the minority communities. And they devolve significant amount of power that's been unprecedented for 30 years. So these proposals provide a blueprint for what the current Sri Lankan government should implement in their stated goal towards bringing about a new constitution for the country.
Yeah, and I mean the country was rattled by this civil war, and that ended with the Tamil Tigers being defeated back in the 2000s, late 2000s if I'm not wrong. But it was a very bloody affair, and it was a bloody affair on a place that is very small but densely packed. I mean, I'm looking at it right now, 65,000 square kilometers, 21 million people. Sri Lanka is 1.5 times bigger than Switzerland, but that's still small. And it's over 20 million inhabitants. So the one of my guests on this channel before, Dr. Darini Rajasingham Senanyake, she also talked about the British colonial legacy, and Dr. Asoka Bandarage as well. And they always pointed out, look, these communities used to live together on this island for centuries, and they didn't kill each other. They were not at each other's throat. So something happened during the British colonial time that then split this island. And can you maybe speak to that a little bit, and maybe if your subject also had thoughts on the legacy of the conflict, where it's coming from?
Yes. So when Ceylon, the now present day Sri Lanka, was under British rule, the British had colonized the whole of Ceylon. There were other powers such as the Portuguese and the Dutch. They were primarily concerned with the naval, controlling the ports, but the British had administrative control over Ceylon, and they had used the English language along with the help of English missionaries, which had largely situated themselves in the Tamil-dominated north and east of the country. They had largely influenced the Tamil-speaking minority to be fluent in English, and as a result, the British colonial power, they had used Tamil people to serve in the Ceylon British administration in disproportionate numbers relative to the majority Sinhalese population, and they were represented in disproportionate numbers and in engineering backgrounds, in the military, in the civil service. So in every sector of society, the minority Tamil community was gaining significant upward mobility, and English became this hallmark of elite status, which is still present to this day. English is the hallmark of elite status. If you know English in Sri Lanka, in South Asia, it's a significant step towards advancement. And there were communities, the Tamil community, the Muslim community, that spoke about their grievances that they would have in the event that Sri Lanka that Ceylon would gain independence. So the British, they had engineered a constitution, the Solberry Constitution, and that was done without the considerations of the Tamil community and the Muslim community. And it had the British had already granted universal franchise to the Ceylon people, and this had caused a great deal of anxiety among the minority Muslim and Tamil community, because now we're in a position where the Sinhalese have overwhelming majority power once the British leaves, and they might seek to retaliate for their grievances. So the British said, don't worry, we're going to give you a constitution. We're going to call it the Solberry Constitution. We're going to put in a provision in this constitution that prevents the government from implementing any discriminatory legislation on the basis of language. So we're going to put that provision in this constitution. And it was a very much European designed constitution, which did not take into account the interests of the Tamil community, the Muslim community, the Indian plantation community, which were Indian indentured servants that were brought from southern India into Sri Lanka to work on the tea plantations. It didn't take into account their considerations. And so this was the constitution that Sri Lanka had in its independence. And once Sri Lanka became independent, they they immediately, within a short period of time, implemented the Sinhala Only Act, which sought to make the Sinhala the sole official language of the country, and it immediately disenfranchised countless number of Tamil people from government sector. If you did not speak Sinhala, then you were immediately unemployed. So it was a huge economic hit for the Tamil community, and that kind of began successive policies among the two major Sinhalese political parties, the United National Party and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, where they were engaging in kind of ethnic outbidding to seeing who could implement more majoritarian policies and who really advocates for the Sinhalese people, their rights. And that led to successive decades of discriminatory policies. And then it resulted in a huge pogrom in July of 1983, where thousands of Tamils were killed, and that set off a civil war, 25-year civil war, where the Tamil people in the north and the east wanted their own separate state, where they felt that's the only way they could be protected from majoritarian Sinhalese violence and discriminatory policies, which had disenfranchised Tamils from in terms of language, in terms of education, in terms of any form of upward economic mobility within Sri Lankan society. So that's a brief history of a very complex.
It is extremely complex, but where I must have missed it. I thought there was a provision in the constitution, in that British mandated constitution, that forbids language discrimination. And then, so how was that enacted? So was the constitution changed actually?
So that provision was in effect disregarded. So you had a attorney general at the time. So when Sri Lanka had gained independence, it was a dominion nation. So you had an attorney general, but it was also a case where it was the leaders of the nation had a huge disgruntled Sinhalese nationalist base that they had to appease. So their rationale for implementing the Sinhala Only Act is, well, 78%. The Prime Minister SWRD Bandaranaike, when he's asked about by the BBC, why did you implement the Sinhala Only Act, even though this has caused a great deal of attention among the minority Tamils, he says to the journalists, and we show this in the documentary, well, a majority of the community of the people in our country, 78%, are Sinhalese. So this seeks to represent the interests of the majority of the community. And that provision within the Constitution, it was basically disregarded. So it's kind of just on the books, but there was no real way and there's no real impediment preventing the Sinhala Only Act from being implemented, because the British, they had in effect left. And as a dominion nation in 1948, the British, the UK, was reeling from the Second World War, so they just didn't have any interest in terms of intervening in terms of discriminatory policies in the nation. So when in 1972, Sri Lanka had become a republic and they had left the dominion, and that gave Sri Lanka even emboldened them even more to implement a constitution that went even further in terms of consolidating the majority powers of the Sinhalese community. And they created a unitary constitution. And in 1978, that constitution was even more centralized as a result of the executive presidency. And it kind of starts a whole nother history from there.
And did that new constitution actually get rid of that provision, or was the provision still there officially, but no constitutional court ever ruled against the act that then came?
Yeah, so that provision was done away with in the new constitution. So the constitution, essentially this 1972 constitution, it gave Buddhism the foremost place within Sri Lanka, bearing in mind that the Tamils are of a Hindu, a significant number of them are Hindus. There are some Christians, Catholics. but overwhelming majority of the nation are Sinhalese Buddhists. So it gave Buddhism the foremost place. It gave Sinhala recognition as the only language yet again, and did not acknowledge Tamil as an official language, despite the fact that in the north and the east, the overwhelming majority of the country, of the people in that region, north and the east, they speak Tamil. So there was no recognition for Tamil. There was no recognition as English as being kind of like a link language. That kind of came about later, and even then there was problems of implementation.
And sorry for my ignorance, but what distinguishes Sinhala from Tamils? Like, if it's not religion, or I mean, if there are several religions within them, and if there are other like differentiating factors, what is the main thing that makes a Tamil and Sinhalese?
So Sinhala is a language. Sinhalese is an ethnic group. So the Sinhalese, they speak the language of Sinhala, and the Tamil people, they're both an ethnic group, and Tamil is also a language. So Sinhala and Tamil, they're two different languages, two different writings, two different ways of speaking.
So but the people themselves, are there any features that distinguish people, or is it very much also like the difference, that led to the genocide in Uganda, in Rwanda, between the Hutu and the Tutsi, which is a very artificial distinction, but also a colonial one in order to divide and rule. Is it a similar issue in Sri Lanka, or are there like different ways where these people came from?
Well, there's like a history where Sinhalese, like the people came from other countries and other parts of India, like for dating back centuries and centuries. But really, there is no real difference among physically among Sinhalese and Tamils. The Tamil people, they regard themselves as being the indigenous inhabitants of the north and east of the country. And the Sinhalese people regard themselves as being indigenous inhabitants of the south and the west, and even the Sinhalese, the nationalists regard the entire land of Sri Lanka as being theirs, and Tamils as being foreigners, and so but there's no real difference in terms of Sinhalese and Tamil people. There's a history where they say, well, they came from certain parts of India or other, but it's all just
centuries and centuries in the past. And
yes.
And maybe let's now focus on Neelan and how he envisioned to use a political solution. And as so often, when groups of people need to live together, usually it's the political framework that decides whether that's going to be successful or not. And just to say, as a Swiss, the Swiss could be at each other's throats. We have 4 languages. It would be really, really simple to foster an environment where the French speakers want to kill the German speakers and vice versa. Wouldn't be that difficult, but luckily political structure that prevents that from happening, and actually fosters a positive way of working together. What was Neelan's vision in order to diffuse this situation that was already heating up, right, and cooking in the 70s and then boiled over in the 80s?
So Neelan was somebody, to understand what was Neelan's political vision for a constitution for Sri Lanka, you have to kind of look at what was Neelan's educational outlook. Neelan was somebody who was a staunch proponent of federalism, of communities living together, of diverse communities living together with equal political rights, language rights, economic rights. And Neelan was somebody who set up institutions in Sri Lanka, the International Center for Ethnic Studies and the Law and Society Trust in Sri Lanka, dedicated and devoted to exploring pluralism, ethnic pluralism, democracy, and sought ways in which sought to create scholarship and literature that really advocated for diverse communities living together, and not just in Sri Lanka, but also in different parts of the world, all across South Asia. And he was somebody that, as a result of his education, he was educated in Sri Lanka in law school, but also did his master's at Harvard and his PhD in law at Harvard Law School. And so he had this very universal perspective about international law and how a constitution needs to be anchored in fundamental principles of international law, equal rights of all human beings, regardless of your ethnic background, your language, whatever part of society you come from. So Sri Lanka's constitution in 1995 was a unitary constitution which consolidated significant power at the central government, the Sinhalese dominated central government, and it resulted in whatever powers the central government gave to the regions could be unilaterally taken away by the central government with a 2/3 majority under any pretense. So this was unsatisfactory to the Tamil community in the north and the east, because you had a government that consolidated all the power at the center under this unitary system, and they could give power with one hand and in a way take it away with the other. And that was the language that Neelan used, and people that formulated the Union of Regions proposals used as being a flaw of the current constitution. And so what Neelan sought to do is to have the central government devolve power to the regions, but also have checks in place that would prevent the central government from unilaterally taking away those powers under some fabricated pretext. And so what the proposals that Neelan put forward, what they did is they sought to devolve powers with respect to education, with respect to land, with respect to agriculture to the regions, and it had checks and balances in place, which would make the governor for each region of the country accountable to the chief minister of that region, and the chief minister of that region would have to be accountable to the local government in that. So there was significant accountability that would prevent the central government from unilaterally taking away the powers that was given to the regions. And there was a devolution commission that was advocated for within the Neelan's constitution, which sought to incorporate people from every region of the country in terms of any disputes that they had in terms of powers that they felt needed to be devolved to the regions, that really incorporated all the governors, the chief ministers of the regions. And it made it difficult for the central government to come in and take away powers that they had previously devolved to the regions. And that remains a fundamental problem of Sri Lanka's current constitution, which is that whatever powers the central government, the singular dominated central government, give to the regions, they could take away immediately. And this continues to cause a great deal of anxiety and frustration among the minority Tamil community, who have been subjected to significant oppression by the Sinhalese majority dominated government. So they need their own measure of autonomy to govern without having to worry about the central government taking away their power. So that's what the proposals did. And that's why they were so popular at the time. And in the documentary, the proposals, academics regarded the proposals as being federalism in all but name. So the Neelan's proposals, they, instead of having the word unitary, they got rid of that word, and instead they decided to call Sri Lanka as a union of regions. So having they envisaged 8 regions and those regions would have powers, significant powers devolved to them with checks and balances in place that would make it very difficult for those powers to be taken away by the central government. So currently in Sri Lanka's constitution, we have something called the concurrent list, and the national list and the regional list. The concurrent list is where there are powers shared, supposedly supposed to be shared by the central government and the regions. But really, the way the concurrent list works is that the central government can give those powers to regions, but immediately take them away. What Neelan's proposals did is it abolished the concurrent list entirely and proposed powers that were defined and distinct between the central government and the regions.
But is Sri Lanka, it must be divided even currently into regions, right? Whatever they are called, states or prefectures. Wouldn't those, even outside the Tamil community, shouldn't there be considerable interest in these what do you call them actually, states or prefectures, or what do you call them?
So they're called provinces. So
the provinces.
Northern province. Yeah.
Shouldn't the provinces at the moment be interested in even outside the Tamil area in having more power devolved to them, or is that not something that in the south and the west gets a lot of traction?
So Sri Lanka's current constitution, in terms of power sharing, it was introduced in 1987 as a result of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution envisaged having provincial council systems, and it had powers, the central government powers, the powers for the regions, and it had the concurrent list. So as I mentioned, what the concurrent list did is that it would be the central government and the regional government. They would have shared powers, but the central government could take away those powers. And this is something that frustrates even the Sinhalese communities in the south and the west of Sri Lanka, because the governors, the chief ministers in those regions, they really don't have power because the central government can just unilaterally give power and take it away.
You need to explain this to me a bit more. This concurrent list is weird. I mean, I haven't heard of a setup like that. So does that mean like the concurrent list says like, hey, you, a governor or minister of finance of province X, please come to the capital, and then we decide together concurrently what to do. But in case we have a disagreement, then I always win. Is that the setup?
It's essentially like that, whereas the concurrent list is supposed to be shared powers, where the central government and the regions are supposed to have shared powers, but in effect, the central government can unilaterally take away those powers if the regional government, they have interests that the central government feels conflicts with their ambitions. So that's why Neelan and many people that were formulating the Union Regions proposals, they said that in effect, the Sri Lanka's current power sharing system, it's one in which power is given with one hand and then taken away with the other. So you have a certain set of powers within the concurrent list they're supposed to be shared, but the central government can just take away those powers unilaterally.
Why is it called a list? Concurrent list?
So that's the power sharing structure. So you have a central list, which is the powers that are reserved for the national government in terms of like so for the
list of powers on both sides, and then the concurrent as in shared powers list. Okay. And Neelan already wanted to change that into a federal structure that was heavily opposed, and his political activism then even cost him his life. Can you maybe just tell us how his story ends before we go back to where we are today?
Yes. So when so by this point in 1995, the ethnic conflict was already at its height, really. So there were Tamil separatist groups. There were Tamil people that decided to take up arms to wage a war against the Sri Lankan government and have their own separate state in the north and east of the country known as Tamil Eelam. and that would be a separate state for the Tamil people, the Tamil-speaking people, and the Sri Lankan government was opposed to this. Successive governments were opposed to this, and they were waging a war to defeat the Tamil separatists. There were several Tamil separatist groups. Eventually, one of the groups, they killed off rival members and they consolidated power. So that group was the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, and their leader was Prabhakaran. So Prabhakaran firmly believed that Tamils should advocate for a separate state, and any Tamil who does not believe in a separate state is a traitor. And so Neelan was advocating for federalism, and he was, by 1995, thousands of Sinhalese and Tamils had been killed as a result of fighting the Indian peacekeeping forces. In 1987 had come into the country, and there was a brutal war that was waged where thousands of Tamils were killed, countless number of Tamils were raped, and there was just huge brutality. There was brutality in the south of the country, in the Sinhala-dominated south. There was just so much bloodshed, and so Neelan came in and he said, let's advocate for federalism, which would take into account the interests of all the communities in the island. It would devolve power from the central government to the regions, ensuring that all communities, not just Tamils, have a measure of autonomy that would allow them to govern, and that would protect their rights with respect to language, with respect to their economic rights. And so Prabhakaran was viewed Neelan as a traitor. How dare you advocate for federalism? You're a Tamil person. You must advocate for separatism. But Neelan, as a member of parliament in Sri Lanka, as somebody that was working with the president at the time, Chandrika Kumaratunga, to put forward these proposals, firmly believed that in pluralism, that communities could, different diverse communities could live together and could coexist. And so the LTTE, Prabhakaran, had a history of killing any Tamils that were acting in ways that were contrary to a separate state. So Prabhakaran had killed Tamil political leaders like Appa Pillai Merithalingam, who was the leader of opposition, had killed off Tamil politicians. Other Tamil politicians had killed off people who were even in the LTT that later defected. So Neelan was given death threats by the LTTE, and on July 29th, 1999, the LTTEs had deployed a suicide bomber to kill Neelan as he was leaving as he was going to his office in Colombo, leaving his home, going to his office in Colombo in a car. He was killed. So that is what happened. Neelan was subjected to a brutal vilification campaign by the LTTE,
by the Tamils, by part of the group that he himself tried to give more power to, right? This is a traditional thing that happens in these power struggles, that within the groups, then violence occurs, especially by hawks against the doves, and he would be a typical type of dove that tries to solve issues peacefully. Can you just tell us, like, his legacy? Is he still a well-known figure in Sri Lanka today?
So Neelan's legacy, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this documentary is because I felt that Neelan's legacy had been forgotten. It's really important, and we discussed this in the documentary. I go to great pains to portray this, but it's really important to acknowledge when talking about Neelan's legacy that it was not solely confined to Sri Lanka. So Neelan was somebody that was advocating for democracy, for democratic governments the world over. So he participated, for instance, in overseeing the plebiscite that happened in Chile in 1988. So Augusto Pinochet, his rule was being challenged by a vote whether or not his rule should be extended for, I believe it was another 7 years. And Neelan took part in an election monitoring campaign to oversee the plebiscite, the voting, the Chileans voting for the plebiscite. So he had oversaw the facilitation of Chile from dictatorship to democracy. In Kazakhstan, Neelan, as a result of his expertise in constitutional law, Kazakhstan the Soviet Union had just broken up, and Kazakhstan was a nuclear power. It had nuclear weapons as a result of the Soviet Union having been part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had conducted significant tests in Kazakhstan when they were a union. So officials from Kazakhstan had called on Neelan, as well as a man named Peter Germer, an academic from Denmark, and Steve Cantor, an academic from the U.S., to advise them on a new constitution for Kazakhstan. And Neelan consistently said that in his advice for a new constitution for Kazakhstan, whatever constitution Kazakhstan has, it needs to take into account the rights of the minority communities. It needs to take into account it needs to have provisions that protected civil liberties, that ensure that people were not discriminated based on their language, based on their religion. So he was very much taking into account his knowledge and history of being a Sri Lankan and what he experienced growing up in Sri Lanka, having set up these institutions in Sri Lanka, like the International Center for Ethnic Studies. He was taking those ideals and promoting them the world over. So when Neelan died, he was regarded as a huge force within the international human rights community. So he was the chairperson for the popular London minority rights group. So he was significantly at the forefront of advocating for the protection of minority rights the world over. So as a member of parliament in Sri Lanka, when he was working on these constitutional reforms for the country, Neelan would consistently speak about the hardships that Tamil people in the north and east were facing at the hands of the Sri Lankan state, in terms of torture, in terms of abduction, in terms of enforced disappearances, in terms of the military restricting goods that were going into the north and the east. He was somebody who was consistently speaking about these issues and also incorporating international law in his speeches. So he would talk about the need to respect the international rights in terms of people to be prevented from being discriminated based on their the religion, based on their language. He would incorporate human rights reports from Amnesty International, from Human Rights Watch. He would reference reports that were made by UN special rapporteurs that would visit the country and that would look at the government's use of draconian legislation like the Prevention of Terrorism Act to arbitrarily detain people. And he spoke about issues where the Sri Lankan armed forces were engaged in rape and killing of Tamil people. So when Prabhakaran says that Neelan is a traitor, and Neelan was somebody who was consistently speaking about the rights and the human rights abuses of the Tamil people as a member of parliament in parliament. And he was somebody who was bringing these ideals of human rights and democracy the world over, you know. And I think that's important, that he was just not somebody who was a Sri Lankan, but he was somebody that believed in pluralism and communities existing together. He believed in those ideals the world over. And he was a firm proponent of democratic solutions that should be the way in which differences need to be resolved, not through violence.
These are good ideas. These are really good ideas. The problem often is when international relations comes into play. And I know this is not the focus of your film, but since you have studied him so much, I would still like to ask, such individuals get very easily used by outside forces in order to implement certain agendas or lobby for certain agendas. And I remember that Tarini on my channel, she once pointed out, when the British left and gave a constitution and then a government, they left, but they left everything in place in order to continue using Sri Lanka as a logistical hub, because it is in the Pacific what Malta is basically in the Mediterranean. It's very, very pivotal strategic place for military but also economic purposes, and that Sri Lanka was passed over into the under the custodianship of the IMF, the World Bank, with loans and other instruments of influence, of having influence over Sri Lanka's government. And ethnic strife is unfortunately something that rather works towards the benefit of any of external powers wanting to influence, because you always have two sides to talk to. Are you aware of the international dimension of Neelan's activism, or what how he worked with outside powers?
Well, Neelan was somebody who believed in institution building. So he believed in having institutions within the global South kind of in solidarity work together in terms of advocating for pluralism and for minority rights. So that was very much his agenda in terms of what he did with the International Center for Ethnic Studies and London Society Trust. He was somebody that took great inspiration in terms of the way how India had managed to, despite like having a billion people with various languages and various identities and religious identities, and how they managed to coexist. So he often took a lot of his values of pluralism from those countries. So he was somebody that I don't think was manipulated by external powers to act in ways that were deceptive or subservient to their interests. Neelan was actually accused of that by the LTTE, that he was an agent of the CIA and he was sent to sabotage the goal of separatism by the LTTE, a separate state. So that he was accused of being his International Center of Ethnic Studies was accused of having been funded by CIA forces. It was linked to the Ford Foundation, the International Center of Ethnic Studies. So that was long used as a kind of a conspiracy to say that Neelan was an agent of the CIA. But all of that is unsubstantiated, and Neelan was somebody who was very devoted and focused towards democracy, towards democratic election monitoring. In terms of South Asia, Neelan's institution, the International Center for Ethnic Studies, was pioneers in terms of election monitoring in Bangladesh and South Africa, and in what he did in Chile. So he was somebody that firmly believed that democracy was the roadmap towards communities coexisting together without violence. And Neelan was somebody who, in his goal to doing that, would often have to work with people, like in terms of Chile, the NDI, the National Democracy Institute. I think I'm messing up the abbreviation, but the NDI has been known to be like a U.S. Kind of CIA affiliated outlet that kind of does the work of the CIA in terms of like subverting democracy.
You mean the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy?
Oh yes.
Yeah. So that one was it a donor of Neelan's institution?
No. So in Chile, they were part of the election monitoring in terms of the plebiscite to determine whether Augusto Pinochet would have 7 years of rule or whether there would be a democracy. And so they were working to oversee the plebiscite, and Neelan was working with them. So Neelan was somebody that would work with people that were establishment figures, but he always maintained his individuality in terms of his mission towards democratic election monitoring, in terms of pluralism, in terms of communities coexisting together. So in that regard, he was somebody I would argue wasn't corrupted by these outside forces. He was somebody that sought to work with them to build consensus on larger issues of pluralism and democracy as he saw it.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense, and also global south to global south, institution building and strengthening and monitoring, because it does help if global south countries actually then go to others, because they naturally don't have a heavy-handed approach, but more of an advice. They do give proper advice and not commands, which is a very good thing. What do you see, just to bring it into the present day before we started talking? You also said, Sri Lanka now again is in a special moment where ideas that Neelan had could be implemented again in order to devolve power. What's going on right now, and why is he still relevant, or his ideas?
So I would argue that this film and his ideas, especially with respect to Sri Lanka, are more relevant now than they had ever been at any time. And the opportunity to implement those ideas are more possible now than they had ever been before. And the reason for that is because Sri Lanka, for the first time, they have a new government in power, which was from outside the traditional two-party system, outside the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, United National Party, outside that system. And instead, for the first time in Sri Lanka's history, a third party has become the governing party, with not just the governing party, but having a supermajority in parliament. So more than a 2/3 majority. So you need a 2/3 majority to implement constitutional reform. So one of the obstacles Neelan faced is he was the president at the time, Chandrika Kumaratunga, who was championing these Union of Regions proposals. She was unable to get a 2/3 majority to implement the proposals that Neelan worked on because of Sinhalese rivalry, that old-fashioned rivalry between the Sinhalese, who believe that these proposals are giving too much power to the Tamils, it's giving too much rights to the Tamils. It's going to lead to separatism. Those fears ended up coming. That was one of the reasons why the proposals did not get 2/3 majority. But now, in present day Sri Lanka, President Anura Kumara Dissanayake has come into power. He's the leader of the National People's Party political coalition, and they have a supermajority in parliament. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake championed on a new constitution. He campaigned, on a new constitution for Sri Lanka, a constitution that would devolve power to the regions and even to the local governments, that would get rid of the executive presidency in Sri Lanka, and that would ensure that power is held at the hands of parliament, and you have a prime minister that is responsive to the needs of parliament. So currently within Sri Lanka's constitution, we have an executive presidency who has a significant amount of power that's concentrated within their hand, and they could curb the interests of parliament and kind of rule in a manner that is somewhat authoritarian. So Anura Kumara Dissanayake pledged to get rid of the executive presidency. Neelan's proposals pledged to get rid of getting rid of the executive presidency, and it proposed and Anura campaigned on devolving power to the regions, to the local governments, to ensuring that the interests of the minority communities are considered and they're protected. So these are the values that Anura Kumara Dissanayake, the current president, campaigned on. And that is why the Tamil community in the north and east voted for the National People's Party, President Disanayake's political coalition. And what we now see is that almost 1 year into his rule, in September it'll be 1 year into President Disanayake's rule, he has not made any move towards constitutional reform. The fiscal budget, it doesn't even allocate any money. The fiscal budget doesn't even allocate any money towards constitutional reform building. That's not even part of the budget. for this year. So it's not even on the table. So despite the fact that they have a super majority, Anura Kumar Dissanayake, he is simply not concerned about constitutional reform because President Dissanayake said we need to fix Sri Lanka's economy because Sri Lanka had a huge economic meltdown in 2022, whereby the Sri Lankan people, they rose up and they chased out President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The Sri Lankan economy, it was in the worst condition it had ever been since its independence. Sri Lanka was in a huge economic recession. The economy was in free fall. So President Dissanayake said, I need to focus on the economy. I need to focus on tackling corruption. I need to focus on these issues, and we can worry about the constitution later. I have a super majority, so we have time for that. But the problem is, the president is squandering this huge, rare opportunity to really implement a constitution that really is inclusive and just, which is what Neelan had advocated for, which is what the Union of Regions proposals had championed. And what this documentary does is it seeks to educate people about the current state of Sri Lanka's constitution, the unitary structure of Sri Lanka's constitution, which is so dangerous in how it is consolidated power within the central government and does not devolve power to the regions in a manner that ensures a degree of autonomy without those powers being taken away unilaterally by the central government. So we're in a rare position with the supermajority where you have a president that championed on implementing a new constitution, which has many of the ideals that Neelan championed for, but yet he's reluctant to do so. So this documentary is designed to educate Sri Lankans especially and to have them demand that President Dissanayake get moving on constitutional reform and implement that constitution, because we have this rare supermajority, which we may not have in the next election. It may be gone. And then we're back to square one.
So people can go and watch your movie for free. They can dive into the thinking of Neelan for free at the homepage name is www.neelanunsilenced.com. Should they go anywhere else also to find your work?
You can follow my my Twitter page as well. It's my first name, Pitasanna. I share a lot of articles that I write. So I'm a senior writer for Jurist, which is a law student-led legal news publication. So I write a lot of articles on Sri Lanka, on global affairs, on Israel-Palestine. I've even interviewed Canada's current ambassador to the United Nations and grilled him extensively on Israel, Palestine, and Russia, Ukraine, and all these other issues. So if you outside of that, you can follow me outside of Sri Lanka. You can follow my content on Twitter as well.
Everybody, please check out Pita's Twitter account. Check out the homepage neelanunsilenced.com. Pitasanna Shanmungathas, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Pascal. It was a pleasure being with you.